In a quaint European village nestled between rolling green hills, Luca lived a life that many would describe as ordinary. The village, with its cobblestone streets and ivy-covered cottages, was picturesque, but for Luca, it was a constant reminder of the struggles he faced. At 32, he was still struggling to find his footing in life. Each day began the same way, waking up before dawn in his small, drafty home, packing his battered briefcase with trinkets, and heading out to sell them door to door. Luca's items were practical yet uninspiring: simple kitchen tools, cheap ornaments, and basic household goods. He would walk for miles each day, knocking on countless doors, only to face rejection more often than not. "I don't need this," a woman would say before slamming the door. "Too expensive," another would scoff, even though the items were sold at the lowest possible price. Luca's earnings barely covered his family's basic needs, and debt had become a constant, oppressive weight on his shoulders. His wife, Maria, worked tirelessly at the local bakery, but even her small income wasn't enough to make ends meet. Their two young children, Elise and Marco, often went to bed with simple meals of bread and cheese. Luca couldn't bear the thought of his family living this way forever, yet he felt trapped in a cycle he couldn't escape. One particularly harsh winter morning, Luca found himself walking through the village square. The biting wind cut through his worn coat as he looked at the bustling marketplace. Merchants displayed vibrant fabrics, fragrant spices, and intricate crafts that attracted crowds of eager buyers. Luca couldn't help but feel out of place, his modest wares overshadowed by the vibrant stalls around him. As the day wore on, rejection after rejection began to chip away at Luca's resolve. By evening, his feet ached, his hands were numb, and his heart felt heavy. He wandered to the edge of the square and sat on a weathered bench under a leafless oak tree. He placed his briefcase beside him, its leather cracked and frayed, much like his spirit. He watched the world go by. Wealthy merchants in tailored suits strolled past, their laughter echoing through the crisp evening air. Families gathered around market stalls, their children clutching treats and trinkets. For Luca, it felt like he was on the outside looking in, a silent observer of a life he could never afford. "Is this all there is to life?" he whispered to himself, his breath forming small clouds in the freezing air. As he sat there, an elderly man approached, his presence almost unnoticed amidst Luca's thoughts. The man was dressed simply, his coat patched but clean, and his face bore the lines of wisdom and experience. "You seem troubled, young man," the stranger said, his voice gentle yet firm. Luca looked up, startled by the interruption. For a moment, he hesitated, unsure whether to respond. But something about the man's kind eyes invited trust. Before he knew it, the words began to spill out. His struggles, his failures, and his fear that he would never be able to provide the life his family deserved. The old man listened intently, nodding occasionally but never interrupting. When Luca finally finished, there was a long silence between them. Then the man spoke, his words measured and deliberate. "You know, sometimes the greatest opportunities come disguised as struggles. Have you ever considered that the key to your success might already be in your hands?" Luca frowned, confused. He glanced at his hands, rough and calloused from years of labor, then at his battered briefcase. "I don't understand," he admitted. The old man smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. "Think deeply about what you're passionate about," he said. "What is it that you truly love or excel at? Perhaps that's where your journey begins." With that, the man patted Luca's shoulder and walked away, disappearing into the bustling marketplace. Luca sat there for a long time, replaying the man's words in his mind. Passion, journey, what could he possibly be passionate about? He had spent so many years merely surviving that the idea of pursuing something he loved felt foreign, even impossible. That night, as the village lights dimmed and a blanket of stars spread across the sky, Luca lay awake in bed. His wife and children slept peacefully beside him, their breaths soft and rhythmic. But Luca's mind raced, filled with questions he couldn't answer. Could there truly be a way out of this endless cycle of struggle? Could he, an ordinary man with no special skills or wealth, ever achieve something extraordinary? As dawn broke, Luca made a decision. He would no longer allow himself to be defined by his circumstances. Somewhere deep within, he felt a spark of determination begin to glow. The stranger's words had planted a seed of hope, and Luca resolved to nurture it, no matter how difficult the journey ahead might be. The next morning, Luca awoke with a renewed sense of determination. The old man's words lingered in his mind. Think deeply about what you're passionate about. But as he prepared for yet another day of peddling his meager wares, doubts crept in. What was he truly passionate about? His life had been a series of compromises and sacrifices, leaving little room for dreams or aspirations. He stepped outside into the crisp morning air, the cobblestone streets glistening with frost. Villagers bustled about, their faces etched with the same weariness Luca felt. As he made his way through the square, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had to change. He didn't know where to begin, but the idea of continuing on this path felt unbearable. By midday, after yet another round of rejection, Luca found himself standing in front of his late father's old workshop. The small wooden structure had been abandoned for years, its windows clouded with dust and its door hanging slightly ajar. His father, a skilled carpenter, had spent countless hours in this workshop, crafting furniture and intricate wood carvings that were once the pride of the village. Luca hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open. The air inside was thick with the smell of sawdust and varnish, a scent that brought back memories of his childhood. He could almost see his father hunched over the workbench, chisel in hand, as he meticulously shaped a piece of wood into something beautiful. The tools were still there, though they were now rusted and worn. Luca ran his fingers over the smooth surface of the workbench, feeling a strange mix of nostalgia and sadness. He had spent so much time here as a boy, watching his father work, but he had never considered following in his footsteps. Without really thinking, Luca picked up a chisel and a block of wood. He wasn't sure what he was doing, but he felt an urge to create something, anything. His hands moved clumsily at first, the years of disuse evident in the awkward strokes of the chisel. But as he worked, a sense of calm began to wash over him. The simple act of shaping the wood felt oddly satisfying, as if a part of him had been waiting for this moment. Hours passed, and the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the workshop. Luca held up his creation. A small, imperfect wooden box. It was far from flawless, but it was his. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of pride. That night, he showed the box to Maria. She examined it carefully, her fingers tracing the rough edges and uneven joints. "It's beautiful," she said softly, though Luca could tell she was being kind. "You should make more." "More?" Luca asked, surprised. "Yes," Maria said with a smile. "You've always been good with your hands. Maybe this is something you can build on." Encouraged by her words, Luca spent the next few weeks in the workshop, honing his skills. He started with simple designs, small boxes, picture frames, and decorative plaques. Each piece was an improvement over the last, and with every creation, Luca felt his confidence grow. He decided to test his luck at the village market, setting up a modest stall with his handmade items. At first, people were hesitant. His pieces weren't as polished or intricate as the goods sold by established craftsmen. But they were unique, each one carrying a charm that reflected the care and effort Luca had put into them. One day, a wealthy merchant stopped by Luca's stall. The man, dressed in a fine coat with gold embroidery, picked up one of Luca's jewelry boxes and examined it closely. "Did you make this?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Luca replied nervously. The merchant nodded thoughtfully. "It's not perfect, but there's something about it, something genuine. I'll take it." Luca could hardly believe it. The merchant paid him more than he had earned in a week of peddling household items. Word began to spread, and soon Luca found himself receiving small orders from villagers who wanted custom pieces. The shift wasn't dramatic, but it was enough to spark a sense of hope in Luca. For the first time in years, he felt as though he was moving forward instead of treading water. He invested his earnings in better tools and spent long nights studying books on woodworking techniques. The work was exhausting, but it was also deeply fulfilling. One evening, as he sat in the workshop sanding the edges of a new box, Maria brought him a cup of tea. She watched him work for a moment before saying, "You're different now." "Different how?" Luca asked, looking up from his work. "There's light in your eyes again," she said with a smile. "It's like you found a part of yourself that was missing." Luca didn't respond, but her words stayed with him. He realized she was right. The workshop had become more than just a place to create. It was a sanctuary, a space where he could dream and build a future for his family. As the weeks turned into months, Luca's skills improved dramatically. He began experimenting with more intricate designs, incorporating elements of the village's rich cultural heritage. His pieces became more than just functional items. They were works of art that told a story. One day, a letter arrived at Luca's home. It was from the wealthy merchant who had bought his first jewelry box. The man was impressed by Luca's progress and wanted to commission a set of custom pieces for his estate. The order was larger than anything Luca had ever done, but he accepted the challenge without hesitation. The commission marked a turning point in Luca's journey. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the validation that came from someone recognizing his talent. For the first time, Luca began to believe that he could build something meaningful, something lasting. But with success came new challenges. The demand for his work began to grow, and Luca struggled to keep up. He knew he couldn't do it alone, so he hired a young apprentice from the village to help him in the workshop. Together, they worked tirelessly, pouring their hearts into each piece. By the end of the year, Luca's reputation had grown beyond the village. People from neighboring towns began seeking out his work, drawn by the unique blend of craftsmanship and authenticity that defined his creations. Luca still had a long way to go, but for the first time in his life, he felt like he was on the right path. The old man's words had been right. The key to success had been in Luca's hands all along. The days following the successful sale of his first handcrafted piece felt like a dream to Luca. Each morning, he awoke with a renewed sense of purpose, eager to dive back into his work. His workshop, once a dusty space filled with forgotten memories, had transformed into a place of creation and hope. The smell of fresh wood, the sound of the chisel gliding across the grain, it all became part of his daily rhythm. He felt alive in a way he hadn't in years. But success, as Luca was beginning to realize, didn't come easily. While his small commission from the merchant had given him confidence, the road ahead was fraught with challenges. His skills were still growing, and the demand for his pieces was increasing faster than he could produce them. At first, the orders were sporadic, local villagers who had heard about his work through word of mouth. Yes, time passed, Luca's reputation began to spread beyond the village. The first big order came when a wealthy family from the nearby city reached out to him. They had seen one of his pieces in a friend's home and wanted several custom items for their estate. Luca was both thrilled and terrified. He had never taken on such a large commission before. The thought of disappointing the family, who clearly had an eye for quality, filled him with anxiety. However, he knew this could be the breakthrough he needed. The client's demands were exacting. They wanted pieces that reflected both elegance and craftsmanship, with intricate designs that would complement the lavish decor of their home. Luca knew that this was not just a chance to make money. It was an opportunity to prove himself and elevate his reputation. For weeks, Luca worked tirelessly, pouring every ounce of energy into the project. The pressure was intense, and there were many moments when he wondered if he could pull it off. His hands, already calloused from years of labor, now bore fresh blisters from the fine work he was attempting. He worked late into the night, often falling asleep at his workbench, only to wake up and resume where he left off. Maria, who had always been his rock, was supportive but also concerned. "You've been working too hard, Luca," she said one evening as she brought him a meal. "You need rest." But Luca, determined to succeed, shook his head. "This is my chance, Maria. I can't afford to waste it. If I can get this right, everything will change." Maria didn't argue, knowing that her husband's passion was his driving force. But she couldn't ignore the toll it was taking on him. Luca was exhausted, physically, mentally, and emotionally. His body ached, and the stress of meeting the client's expectations weighed heavily on his mind. He was no longer just working for survival. He was working for something much greater: his future, his family's future, and his dream of building something meaningful. The day of the delivery arrived, and Luca loaded the finished pieces into his cart. The anticipation was palpable as he made his way to the client's estate. The mansion loomed before him, its grandiose architecture a stark contrast to the modest home he had grown up in. He felt a mixture of awe and fear as he approached the front door. The family's head of household, a tall man in a sharp suit, greeted him with a firm handshake. "I'm eager to see your work," the man said, his voice cold yet professional. Luca felt his heart race as he carefully unloaded the pieces and set them up in the designated rooms. He was meticulous, ensuring that every detail was perfect, from the finish on the wood to the alignment of the designs. When the family entered the room to inspect the work, Luca held his breath. The head of the family walked around the pieces, his sharp eyes examining every curve and edge. The silence was deafening, and Luca's palms grew sweaty. Finally, the man spoke. "You've exceeded my expectations," he said, his voice softer now. "These pieces are truly remarkable. I'll be sure to recommend you to my colleagues." Luca exhaled in relief, his body sagging with exhaustion, but also with pride. This was the breakthrough he had been waiting for. He had proven himself capable, and his work had earned the respect of those who had the means to pay for quality. The payment for the commission was generous, far beyond anything Luca had ever imagined. He could now pay off most of his debts and still have enough to reinvest in his business. More importantly, the recognition from this family opened the doors to new opportunities. Soon, Luca began receiving inquiries from other wealthy clients, all eager to commission pieces from the man who had crafted such fine work. Despite the successes, Luca remained grounded. He knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead was still filled with uncertainties, but he felt a new sense of confidence. His work, his passion, and his persistence were finally beginning to pay off. Each order, each commission, was another step toward his dream of becoming more than just an ordinary man. He was beginning to shape his own destiny. In the months that followed, Luca continued to refine his craft and expand his business. He hired more skilled artisans to help with the increasing demand, and together, they produced pieces that were sought after by clients far and wide. His name became synonymous with quality, and soon he was no longer just a small-town craftsman. He was a respected artist, known across the region for his exceptional work. But despite his growing success, Luca never lost sight of the lessons he had learned along the way. He understood now that success wasn't about wealth or recognition. It was about the joy of creating something meaningful and the satisfaction of knowing that he had stayed true to his values. And so, Luca's journey continued. He had tasted success, and though he knew there would be many challenges ahead, he also knew that he was capable of overcoming them. The road to becoming a millionaire was long and filled with obstacles, but with each step, Luca was growing closer to the life he had always dreamed of. Luca had become a name to reckon with in the world of fine woodworking. The success of his early commissions brought a sense of pride and accomplishment, but it also introduced a host of new challenges. The humble craftsman from the small European village was now handling high-profile clients, each with increasingly complex demands. As his reputation grew, so did the pressure. He was no longer just creating for his community. He was now creating for a world that expected perfection. The transformation from a struggling artisan to a sought-after craftsman was not as seamless as it appeared on the surface. Behind the scenes, Luca's life was anything but peaceful. The long hours he spent working in his workshop took a toll on his health. His back ached, his hands were stiff from constant use of tools, and his mind often felt cluttered with worries about meeting deadlines and fulfilling expectations. One cold morning, after a long night of finishing a delicate set of cabinets for a wealthy client, Luca stumbled out of the workshop and into the fading light of day. His body felt like lead, each step a struggle. As he leaned against the wooden doorframe of his workshop, he reflected on how far he had come. The pieces he had crafted were more intricate than anything he had ever imagined making, yet the burden of perfection was starting to weigh on him. Maria, who had been handling much of the business side of things, was concerned. "You need rest, Luca," she said one evening, noticing his weary eyes. "I can see how much you're pushing yourself. We have enough orders to keep us busy for a while. You don't have to do it all." Luca hesitated, the pressure to succeed gnawing at him. His dreams of expanding his business and building a legacy were all within reach, but at what cost? "I don't know if I can afford to slow down," he admitted. "The more work I take on, the more clients want. What if it all falls apart if I don't keep pushing forward?" Maria placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've already proven yourself, Luca. Don't let the fear of losing it all keep you from enjoying the success you've earned." But the fear lingered. It was a fear of failure, of losing the momentum he had built. Luca had been a man of humble beginnings, and now success had made him afraid of losing everything he had worked for. He began to realize that the pursuit of wealth and recognition, which had once seemed like the ultimate goal, was slowly consuming the very essence of his happiness. One afternoon, while working on a new set of custom dining chairs for a prestigious hotel, Luca's assistant, Matteo, brought up an important question. "Luca, we've been getting a lot of orders, but I've noticed something," Matteo said, looking concerned. "The quality of your work, your signature, is beginning to slip. You're trying to do too much at once, and it's affecting the final product." Luca paused, the weight of Matteo's words sinking in. He had been so focused on meeting deadlines and satisfying every client's request that he had lost sight of what truly mattered: craftsmanship. It wasn't just about creating beautiful pieces. It was about creating pieces that reflected his soul, his passion, and his dedication. That evening, Luca sat alone in the workshop, staring at the unfinished chairs. They were well made, certainly, but they didn't have the same heart that his earlier works had. The passion was missing. He knew that if he wanted to continue growing, he would have to find a way to balance his ambition with his love for the craft. Without that balance, his work would lose its essence, and with it, the respect he had earned. The next day, Luca made an important decision. He cut back on the number of orders he accepted. Rather than taking on every request, he focused on a few select clients whose values aligned with his own. He also brought in more skilled workers, trusting them to take on some of the simpler tasks while he could focus on the more intricate, artistic pieces. This allowed him to maintain the quality of his work without sacrificing his well-being. It wasn't an easy transition. There were moments when he questioned his decision. Would his business survive if he didn't take on as many commissions? Would clients look elsewhere for faster, cheaper products? But as the weeks passed, Luca began to notice a change. The pieces he created once again carried the same spark they had when he first started. His passion was reignited, and the fear that had once consumed him began to fade. Maria noticed the change too. "You're more like the old Luca," she remarked one evening after seeing the new set of custom cabinets he had completed. "There's fire in your work again." Luca smiled, a weight lifting off his shoulders. "I've learned something important, Maria. Success isn't just about doing more. It's about doing the right thing, the thing that truly matters." With this new perspective, Luca's business continued to thrive, but it did so in a way that honored his original vision. His pieces became even more sought after, not just for their beauty, but for the care and attention to detail that went into each one. Luca had found a way to marry his ambition with his love for the craft, and in doing so, he had created a lasting legacy, not just for his family, but for the generations to come. But the challenges didn't stop there. As Luca's reputation grew, so did the demands. New opportunities came knocking, offering more money and greater prestige, but Luca learned to navigate these waters carefully. He no longer felt the need to prove himself to anyone. He had already achieved what he set out to do. One day, an invitation arrived from the prestigious Grand Woodworking Exhibition in the city. The exhibition was known for showcasing the finest craftsmen from around the world, and winning an award there was considered the pinnacle of success. Luca knew that this would be the ultimate test. It wasn't just about the recognition. It was about showing the world that his craftsmanship was on par with the best in the world. But this time, Luca approached the invitation differently. Rather than rush to prepare an entry, he took his time. He focused on the project he wanted to present, pouring his heart into every detail. He was no longer driven by the fear of failure, but by a desire to create something beautiful that would speak for itself. As the years passed, Luca's name became synonymous with the finest handcrafted furniture in the region. His workshop, once a small, dusty space, had expanded into a well-oiled operation. The simple designs he started with had now transformed into complex, breathtaking pieces of art. Yet despite his success, Luca felt something was missing. The hunger that had driven him to start his journey was still there, but it was different now. It was no longer about proving his worth or surviving, but about truly leaving a legacy. He knew he had built something special in his village, but he had outgrown it. His ambition had stretched beyond the boundaries of his home, and the time had come to take the next big step, to go beyond the small regional market and enter the competitive world of international craftsmanship. It was a bold move. Luca had always been a man of his community, working for local clients who respected him for his skill and integrity. But his reputation had reached the ears of major collectors, architects, and designers from cities across Europe. The thought of leaving his familiar surroundings, his loyal clients, and even his family's land was unsettling. But he couldn't deny the pull of something greater. The prospect of showcasing his work in international exhibitions, collaborating with world-class designers, and expanding his business to new markets had become an irresistible vision. One chilly evening, as Luca sat in the workshop with Maria, contemplating the road ahead, she spoke up. "You've come so far, Luca," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You've built something incredible here. But I can see it in your eyes. You're ready for more. If this is what you need to do, then I support you. We'll do it together." Luca gazed at her, his heart filled with gratitude. Maria had been his partner, his anchor, through every up and down. Without her, he would not have made it this far. But now the question was no longer about whether he could continue to grow his business locally. It was about taking risks, venturing into unfamiliar territories, and testing his abilities on a global scale. "I don't know if I'm ready," Luca confessed. "The stakes are much higher now. If I fail, it's not just my livelihood at risk, it's everything we've worked for." Maria smiled reassuringly. "You've already proven yourself, and you'll do it again. Just remember, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And no matter what happens, we'll face it together." The decision was made. Luca would begin preparations for his first international exhibition. He invested his savings into creating a stunning collection of unique, one-of-a-kind pieces that would captivate potential buyers and collectors. He worked tirelessly, putting in long hours to ensure that each piece not only met his high standards, but surpassed them. The day of the exhibition arrived, and Luca felt a mix of excitement and dread as he loaded his pieces onto a transport vehicle. The journey would take him to Milan, the fashion and design capital of Italy. It was a place where the finest craftsmen from around the world showcased their work, and Luca knew that he would be competing against the best. When he arrived at the exhibition hall, Luca couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The space was grand, filled with the buzz of other artisans and designers who had flown in from all corners of the globe. The air was thick with anticipation, and the walls were lined with some of the most stunning creations he had ever seen. The pressure to stand out was immense, and for a moment, Luca doubted himself. But as he set up his booth, arranging his pieces with the same care he had used for years, something inside him clicked. This was his moment. He had spent years perfecting his craft, and now it was time to show the world what he was capable of. He took a deep breath, centered himself, and stepped back to admire the collection he had put together. It was a reflection of everything he had learned and everything he hoped to achieve. Over the next few days, Luca's booth became a point of fascination. People stopped by, admiring the fine detail and the originality of his designs. Some asked questions about his process, others inquired about commissions, but most of all, people seemed moved by the heart that was evident in each piece. Luca had not just created furniture, he had created stories, emotions, and experiences, all woven into the grains of wood and the intricacies of craftsmanship. At the end of the exhibition, Luca was approached by a renowned designer who had seen his work. "Your pieces are unlike anything I've seen," the designer said. "They speak to something deeper, something timeless. I would like to commission a series for a luxury hotel in Paris." Luca's heart raced. This was the break he had been hoping for, the validation that his decision to venture beyond his village was the right one. The commission was not only lucrative, but would put his work in the hands of the most prestigious clientele. It was a dream come true, and yet it came with its own set of challenges. The designer had high expectations, and the stakes were even higher now. But Luca was no longer the young craftsman struggling to make ends meet. He was a seasoned artist with a clear vision of his place in the world. He accepted the commission, knowing that it was just the beginning of a new chapter in his journey. Back home in the village, news of Luca's success spread like wildfire. His friends, family, and loyal clients all celebrated his achievements. But Luca remained grounded. He had learned that success wasn't just about the accolades. It was about staying true to his craft, to his values, and to the people who had supported him along the way. With the new commission in hand, Luca's career flourished. He became a sought-after designer, traveling to different cities and working with top-tier clients. Yet through it all, he remained humble, never forgetting the village that had shaped him into the man he had become. And as he looked back on his journey, Luca realized that the true essence of success was not measured by the wealth or fame he had gained, but by the joy and fulfillment that came from creating something meaningful. He had gone from an ordinary man with a dream to an extraordinary artisan who had carved out his own path in the world. But his journey was far from over. The road ahead was still long, and there were new challenges to face, new heights to reach, and new dreams to chase. And Luca, now more than ever, was ready for whatever came next. Luca's success in Milan marked a turning point. The commission from the renowned designer in Paris was a milestone, but it also placed him on a path that was more demanding than anything he had experienced before. The luxury hotel project would require him to create several bespoke pieces that would be showcased in one of the most prestigious settings in the world. It wasn't just about craftsmanship anymore. It was about making a statement. As he began working on the designs for the Parisian project, Luca felt the weight of ambition on his shoulders. The world was watching. He could no longer afford to make mistakes, and the pressure to deliver something extraordinary was almost suffocating. This was a different kind of challenge. The stakes were higher, and every detail had to be perfect. Luca knew that a single misstep could cause him to lose the opportunity he had worked so hard to gain. For the first time in years, Luca found himself doubting his abilities. Was he truly capable of creating something that would stand out on the international stage? The project required him to push the boundaries of his craft, incorporating modern design elements while staying true to the timeless beauty of traditional woodworking. He had to blend innovation with authenticity, and that was a difficult task. Days turned into weeks as Luca immersed himself in the project. The workshop was his sanctuary, but it had also become a prison. He worked in isolation, with only the hum of the workshop's tools and the quiet murmur of his thoughts for company. Maria, who had always been there to support him, could see the toll the project was taking on him. His energy was drained, and the joy he once found in his craft seemed to have disappeared. One evening, after an especially grueling day, Luca sat on the edge of his workbench, staring at the half-finished piece in front of him. It was a sculpted chair designed to be the centerpiece of the hotel's lobby, a fusion of modern lines and classic elegance. Yet, despite the countless hours he had spent perfecting the design, something felt off. The piece didn't sing to him the way his earlier works had. He had lost the spark that had made his work unique. Maria approached him, her footsteps soft on the wooden floor. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Luca, you've always said that your best work comes from the heart. But I see you struggling. Maybe it's time to step away for a moment. Let yourself breathe." Luca looked up at her, his eyes weary. "I can't. If I don't finish this, I'll lose everything. This project is my chance to make a mark on the world." Maria shook her head. "You've already made your mark, Luca. You've created a name for yourself with your passion and your authenticity. No project, no matter how big, will change that." Luca felt a flicker of doubt. Could he really step away? Could he find peace in knowing that his success wasn't defined by this one project, but by the journey he had taken? His mind was a storm of thoughts, but deep down he knew Maria was right. He had let his ambition blind him to what truly mattered, his passion for the craft. The next day, Luca decided to take a break from the hotel project. He spent the afternoon walking through the forests near his village, breathing in the fresh air, letting the quiet stillness of nature calm his racing mind. It was in these moments of solitude that he rediscovered the joy of creation. The raw, unfiltered connection to the wood, the tools, and the craft that had first drawn him to this profession. He realized that he had been so focused on the expectations of others that he had forgotten why he started in the first place. Returning to the workshop with renewed clarity, Luca made a bold decision. He would finish the hotel commission, but on his own terms. He would incorporate the modern elements that the client wanted, but he would also infuse each piece with the soul of his craft, the passion, the dedication, and the authenticity that had made him who he was. Days later, when Luca presented the finished pieces to the designer in Paris, he felt a sense of pride that he hadn't experienced in years. The pieces were striking, innovative, yet timeless. They captured the essence of both the modern world and the traditional craft that Luca had spent his life mastering. The designer was thrilled, and the project was an overwhelming success. The luxury hotel was soon filled with compliments from guests and critics alike, and Luca's reputation soared. Yet, in the midst of the praise, Luca realized something important. The success of the Paris project wasn't what had made him a great craftsman. It was his ability to stay true to himself, to infuse every piece with his passion, no matter how high the stakes. His journey had taught him that true success was not about external recognition, but about staying connected to his craft and his values. Back in the village, Luca's business continued to flourish. His work was now being recognized in cities around the world, but he had learned to balance his ambition with his inner peace. He expanded his team, trained new artisans, and began to mentor the next generation of craftsmen. He no longer felt the need to prove himself to anyone. His legacy was not in the number of commissions he received or the wealth he accumulated, but in the quality of his work and the integrity he maintained throughout his journey. Luca had come a long way from the young man who had dreamed of making a name for himself. He had faced challenges, doubts, and setbacks, but he had learned to navigate them with wisdom and grace. His ambition had driven him to great heights, but it was his passion for his craft that had kept him grounded. And in the end, it was that passion that would ensure his place among the greats in the world of design. But Luca knew that his journey wasn't over. There would always be new challenges, new opportunities, and new lessons to learn. He was no longer chasing a dream, he was living it, one piece at a time. Luca's name had become known not just in the world of woodworking, but also in the exclusive circles of luxury designers and international collectors. The commission for the Paris hotel had propelled him into a new realm of success. As his business flourished, he was no longer the local craftsman with modest ambitions. He was an artist whose work was sought after by the world's elite, and the expectations placed upon him had reached dizzying heights. But with this newfound fame came its own set of challenges. Luca had to adapt to a world that was far different from the one he had known. No longer was he simply creating pieces for those who appreciated fine craftsmanship. Now he was collaborating with designers who pushed boundaries, customers who had very specific desires, and brands whose demands were relentless. Each new project seemed bigger, more complex, and more critical to his reputation. As the months passed, Luca found himself juggling more projects than ever before. His small, intimate workshop, which had once been his sanctuary, was no longer able to handle the influx of work. His team grew, and with it, the logistics and management of his business. While his assistants and apprentices worked tirelessly to keep up with demand, Luca often found himself in endless meetings with designers, architects, and high-profile clients. He was no longer just crafting wood. He was managing a growing empire. But despite his success, Luca couldn't shake the feeling of being overwhelmed. There were times when he missed the simplicity of his earlier days, when he could work alone in his workshop, crafting each piece with his hands, without the distractions of business. He yearned for the quiet moments when his creativity flowed without pressure, and the satisfaction of creating something purely for the joy of it. One evening, as Luca sat alone in his office after another long day of meetings, he couldn't help but feel a sense of exhaustion creeping over him. His life had become a whirlwind of high-profile projects, endless negotiations, and public appearances. The joy of creating had been overshadowed by the demands of success. For the first time in years, he questioned whether the path he had chosen was truly fulfilling. Maria, who had always been his sounding board, noticed the change in him. She saw the fatigue in his eyes and the way his hands trembled slightly as he sipped his evening tea. "Luca, we need to talk," she said gently one evening. "You've been pushing yourself so hard lately. I can see how much this is wearing you down. I know you want to create a legacy, but don't forget about the life you've built." Luca looked at her, his heart heavy. "I don't know, Maria. I've worked so hard to get here, and now that I'm here, it feels like I'm losing everything that made me happy. The pressure is too much. The expectations are too high." Maria reached for his hand, her touch comforting. "You've already created something incredible, Luca. Your work has touched so many people. But I think it's time for you to step back and rediscover why you started this journey in the first place. You don't need to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders." Luca took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words settle within him. He had spent so many years striving for success that he had forgotten the simple joy of creating for creation's sake. It wasn't about the accolades, the recognition, or the money. It was about the love of the craft, the connection to the materials, and the satisfaction of seeing a piece come to life. The next morning, Luca made a decision. He would scale back. He would no longer accept every project that came his way, no matter how lucrative or prestigious. He would focus on the work that truly inspired him, the projects that allowed him to explore new ideas, push the boundaries of his creativity, and reconnect with the artistry he had once loved so much. Luca also decided to invest in his team. He would train his apprentices not just in the technical aspects of woodworking, but in the philosophy of craftsmanship. The importance of passion, patience, and authenticity in every piece. He would pass on his knowledge to the next generation, ensuring that his legacy was not just about the pieces he created, but about the values he instilled in those who worked with him. His decision wasn't easy. There were many clients who were disappointed when he turned down their offers, and there were moments of doubt when he wondered if he had made the right choice. But as time passed, Luca began to feel a sense of peace. His workshop, once again, became a place of inspiration, where he could focus on the craft without the pressures of growing his empire. The work he created was richer, more meaningful, and more fulfilling than ever before. One day, as Luca stood in his workshop, surrounded by the wooden creations that had come to life under his hands, he realized that he had found balance. He was no longer chasing success for its own sake. He was creating because it brought him joy. The world around him may have changed, but his love for the craft remained constant. Maria joined him in the workshop, smiling as she watched him work. "You've done it, Luca," she said softly. "You've found your peace." Luca looked up at her, his heart full. "I've learned that true success isn't measured by the number of projects or the size of the business. It's measured by the joy you find in what you do and the impact you have on the people around you." And with that, Luca knew that his journey had come full circle. He had started as an ordinary man with a dream, and through hard work and perseverance, he had created a name for himself. But now he had learned the most important lesson of all. True success wasn't about the destination. It was about the journey, the passion, and the connections made along the way. As Luca looked out at the world he had built, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had found his place in the world, not by striving for more, but by staying true to himself and the craft he loved. His legacy would live on not just in the beautiful pieces he created, but in the hearts of those who had learned from him, been inspired by him, and shared in his journey. Luca had long since learned the difference between success and fulfillment. His journey from a humble craftsman in a small village to an international icon in the world of luxury furniture had been nothing short of extraordinary. But with that success came a new reality. A reality that felt far removed from the joy of simply creating art with his hands. He had built his empire, but now it seemed that the empire was demanding more from him than he was willing to give. After scaling back on the volume of his work and refocusing on the pieces that truly inspired him, Luca had hoped for a period of peace. He was committed to creating designs that would push boundaries, but without the burden of external pressure. Yet it seemed the world was unwilling to let him go. Clients, collectors, and designers were still knocking on his door, eager to work with the man whose creations had become the symbol of craftsmanship and luxury. As Luca began to navigate this new phase of his career, he found himself torn. On one hand, he was living the life he had always dreamed of, his name synonymous with excellence in design. On the other hand, he was losing the very thing that had started it all, the pure joy of creating for the sake of creation. The work in his workshop became increasingly complicated, each new project demanding more of his time, his creativity, and his energy. The design firms, the international clients, and the elite hotel chains that had once been so fascinated with his craft were now dictating every aspect of his work. They wanted more, bigger pieces, more extravagant designs, and faster turnarounds. They didn't care that Luca had once worked at his own pace, perfecting each piece with patience and care. Now it was about speed and mass appeal. They demanded that he keep up with the ever-growing expectations of the luxury market. Luca had always believed that his artistry should be his greatest asset, but as the demands grew, he realized that his reputation was being shaped by forces he couldn't control. The joy of craftsmanship had been replaced by the hustle of meeting deadlines, managing contracts, and ensuring his pieces met the rising standards of the elite. The pressure was mounting, and with every passing day, Luca felt more like a cog in a machine rather than an artist creating freely. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of finalizing plans for an upcoming collection, Luca found himself standing in front of his workshop's wide window, gazing at the distant mountains. The setting sun cast long shadows over the landscape, and for a moment, everything felt still. He had come so far, achieved things he had never imagined. But now, looking out at the horizon, he felt a deep sense of emptiness. Was this really what he had worked for all these years? Maria entered the room quietly, sensing that something was wrong. She knew Luca too well to let him hide his feelings. She stood beside him and asked softly, "What's on your mind?" Luca turned to her, his eyes tired but filled with resolve. "I don't know anymore, Maria. I've built this empire, but I feel like I'm losing myself. I've sacrificed everything, the quiet moments, the pure joy of creating, for a version of success that feels hollow. I'm not sure if I'm still the person I was when I first started." Maria took his hand, her touch grounding him. "I've seen the way you've given everything to your craft, Luca. But maybe it's time for you to step away, to find balance again. You've proven your worth. You've achieved everything you set out to do. Maybe now it's time to build something new, something that brings you joy again." Luca was silent for a long time, contemplating her words. The world around him had changed, and so had he. But in the quiet of the evening, he realized that Maria was right. He didn't have to keep pushing himself to the limit. The journey that had once been about survival and proving himself had evolved into something else entirely, something he no longer recognized. The next few weeks were a period of deep reflection. Luca took time off from the constant flow of high-profile commissions and immersed himself in personal projects. He returned to the basics, the designs that first inspired him, the simple elegance of nature that had always informed his work. He began to carve smaller pieces, just for the sake of carving. He didn't have to answer to anyone anymore, and for the first time in years, he felt free. It was during this time that Luca discovered a new passion, one that had always been there but had been buried beneath the weight of success. He began mentoring young craftsmen, sharing the knowledge he had accumulated over the years. He taught them not just how to carve wood, but how to pour their hearts into their work. He showed them the importance of taking their time, of respecting the materials they used, and of understanding the true meaning of craftsmanship. He wanted to instill in them the same love for the craft that had once driven him. Soon, Luca's workshop was no longer just a place for his own creations. It had become a hub for aspiring artists and designers, a place where they could come to learn, collaborate, and grow. The atmosphere was one of community, not competition, and for the first time in years, Luca felt like he was part of something greater than himself. His legacy was no longer defined by the number of pieces he created or the fame he had garnered. It was defined by the impact he had on others, the lives he touched through his craft. And as he looked out at the mountains once again, Luca realized that he had found what he had been searching for all along. It wasn't about fame, fortune, or accolades. It was about the joy of creating, the satisfaction of nurturing the next generation of artists, and the peace that came from living a life true to his values. The pressure of the luxury market no longer consumed him. Luca had come to terms with the fact that success was not a destination. It was a journey that was meant to be shared, not in solitude, but with those who appreciated the true essence of the craft. And in this new chapter, Luca had found peace. He was no longer chasing after glory. He was building something that would last far beyond his own lifetime, a legacy of artistry, mentorship, and passion that would continue to inspire generations to come. In the years that followed his decision to scale back and rediscover his true passion, Luca began to notice the profound impact his journey had on others. The craftsmen he had mentored were now not just following in his footsteps. They were carving their own paths, creating stunning works of art that embodied the very principles Luca had instilled in them. And as each apprentice found their unique voice, the ripple effect of Luca's influence spread far beyond his workshop. His small village, once quiet and overlooked, became a haven for artists and designers from around the world. Young craftsmen came to study under Luca's guidance, and the local community flourished as the demand for finely crafted, bespoke furniture grew. Luca's name was no longer just synonymous with luxury. It was a symbol of a return to authenticity, of the timeless beauty that could only come from creating with care and heart. It wasn't just the work he had passed on to others that mattered. The values Luca had embodied, patience, respect for the craft, and a commitment to quality over quantity, had begun to permeate the industry. While the world of luxury design had once been driven by mass production and fleeting trends, a new generation of artisans was rising, inspired by Luca's journey to stay true to their passion. They were creating not just for profit, but for love of the craft itself. One of Luca's former apprentices, Matteo, had become a renowned designer in his own right. Matteo had opened his own workshop in Milan, and it wasn't long before his work began to catch the eye of high-profile clients. But Matteo, much like Luca, had learned the importance of maintaining balance in his life. He refused to let the pressures of success overwhelm him. He focused on creating fewer, but more meaningful, pieces, each one a reflection of his dedication to craftsmanship. In a recent interview, Matteo was asked about his success and what had influenced his design philosophy. His answer echoed the lessons Luca had taught him. It's not about how many pieces you make or how much money you earn. It's about creating something that lasts, something that speaks to people on a deeper level. And that's something Luca taught me. Luca read the interview with a sense of quiet pride. He hadn't expected his legacy to take on such a powerful form. What had started as a desire to create beautiful pieces of furniture had evolved into a movement, one that championed the values of quality, passion, and authenticity. It was a movement that was reshaping the design world and influencing how people viewed art and craftsmanship. But even as his influence grew, Luca found himself increasingly disconnected from the very world he had helped to create. The demands of his business, the never-ending flow of orders and requests, were starting to take their toll once again. While he had once been determined to succeed, Luca now found himself questioning the true cost of that success. Was the recognition, the awards, and the accolades truly worth the sacrifices he had made along the way? And had he, in his pursuit of perfection, unintentionally contributed to the very system he had once sought to escape? Maria, ever perceptive to his inner turmoil, noticed the growing restlessness in Luca's demeanor. It wasn't just the long hours or the pressure of managing a successful business. It was something deeper. He was starting to feel like a prisoner of his own success. The joy of creating had faded once again, replaced by the constant need to meet external expectations. Luca, Maria said one evening as they sat together in their garden, the warm glow of the setting sun casting a peaceful light on the scene. "You've built something incredible. You've shared your knowledge with so many, and you've inspired countless others. But it's okay to step back again. You've given the world your gift. Now it's time to take care of yourself." Her words were like a balm to his soul. For the first time in months, Luca allowed himself to truly hear what she was saying. He had spent so many years living for the world and the people who admired his work that he had forgotten to live for himself. The pursuit of success had once felt like a noble endeavor, but now it seemed that the true challenge lay in finding peace within himself. Luca made a decision. He would step away from the whirlwind of luxury commissions and high-profile projects once more. He would take time to rediscover the simple joys of his craft, just as he had done years ago. He would once again create for the sake of creating, not for the fame, not for the recognition, but because it brought him happiness. And in doing so, he would reclaim the peace that had long eluded him. This time, Luca didn't need to prove anything. He had already achieved more than he had ever dreamed of. His legacy was secure, not in the pieces he had created, but in the lives he had touched. The craftsmen he had mentored, the clients who had experienced his work, and the industry he had helped to transform would remember him not just for his designs, but for the values he had lived by. He had changed the way people thought about craftsmanship, and in doing so, he had forever altered the course of his industry. As Luca returned to his workshop, he no longer felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. He was free to create without the pressure of success. The pieces he crafted were simpler, more intimate. He would often spend hours lost in the grain of the wood, feeling the smoothness of the material as it came to life beneath his hands. There was no rush, no deadline, just the quiet meditative process of creation. And in those moments of quiet as he carved and shaped each piece with his hands, Luca found the peace he had been searching for all along. The work was still beautiful, still intricate, but it was no longer about the recognition or the fame. It was about the process itself. It was about the joy of creation. And for the first time in years, Luca was content. Years had passed since Luca first stepped away from the fast-paced demands of high-profile commissions, choosing instead to focus on the work that truly brought him joy. His life had settled into a comfortable rhythm, one where creativity, passion, and purpose intertwined seamlessly. His workshop had become a sanctuary, a place where time moved at its own pace, and the art of woodworking had returned to its roots, slow, deliberate, and filled with heart. Luca was content. He had found peace in the simplicity of his craft, in the steady flow of the wood beneath his hands, and in the quiet moments when inspiration would strike. He had reclaimed the joy of creation, and with it, a sense of balance he had never thought possible. His work was still sought after by the world's elite, but he no longer chased the spotlight. Instead, he had become a mentor, guiding the next generation of craftsmen to embrace the true essence of their work. His legacy was no longer defined by the pieces he had created, but by the lives he had touched. However, Luca couldn't ignore the whispers of the past. The once constant yearning for more, the insatiable desire to prove himself, was a distant echo in the back of his mind. While he had found peace, he had also come to realize that his journey had not been without its sacrifices. The years spent pursuing success had taken their toll, not just on his work, but on his relationships, his health, and his sense of self. The price of glory had been higher than he had ever anticipated. It was during one of his routine visits to the nearby market that Luca ran into an old friend, Isabella. She had been one of the first to see his potential, the one who had encouraged him to follow his dreams when he had been nothing more than a young craftsman with little more than hope in his heart. Isabella had always been a steady presence in Luca's life, offering guidance and wisdom when he needed it most. "Luca," she said with a warm smile, "it's been too long." He returned her smile, though it was tinged with the weight of unspoken thoughts. "It has, Isabella. It's good to see you." As they walked together, catching up on old times, Isabella couldn't help but notice the subtle changes in Luca's demeanor. There was a sense of quiet fulfillment in him, but also a hint of something else, a deep reflection that seemed to linger behind his eyes. "You've built an empire, Luca," Isabella remarked, her tone both proud and curious. "You've accomplished everything most people could only dream of. But I see a different kind of change in you. What is it? What's next for you?" Luca paused, considering her words. "Next," he chuckled softly, though there was little humor in his laugh. "I don't know, Isabella. I've spent so many years chasing success, but now I'm starting to realize that it's not the destination that matters. It's the journey. It's the moments in between. And I think I've spent too much time looking ahead, forgetting to live in the present." Isabella nodded, understanding the weight of his words. She had seen the pressure that came with Luca's rise to fame, the sacrifices he had made in the name of success. And she had always known that his true fulfillment would come not from his accomplishments, but from his ability to find peace with himself. "You've learned a valuable lesson," she said, her voice soft. "But I think you still have more to give, Luca. Not just to the world, but to yourself. It's not too late to find that balance you've been searching for." Luca thought about her words for a long time after they parted ways. He had reached the pinnacle of his career, but there was still something missing. The constant pursuit of perfection had taken him far, but it had also led him to a place of inner conflict. He realized that there was one more lesson he had yet to learn: the art of letting go. The next few weeks were a time of introspection for Luca. He began to truly let go of the need to control every aspect of his work, of his life. He stopped measuring his success by the number of commissions or the prestige of his clients. Instead, he focused on the process, on the joy of creating something beautiful with his hands. It was no longer about the end result, it was about the experience itself. As he spent more time in his workshop, Luca also began to reconnect with the world outside of his craft. He reconnected with old friends, spent more time with Maria, and found joy in the simple pleasures that life had to offer. He had built an empire, but now he was building something more meaningful. A life filled with balance, peace, and purpose. One day, as Luca sat in his garden, watching the sun set over the mountains, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. His journey had come full circle. He had started as a humble craftsman with nothing but a dream, and now he was a man who had lived a life filled with both triumph and struggle. But in the end, it was not the accolades or the recognition that defined him. It was the love he had for his craft, the relationships he had built, and the peace he had finally found within himself. Luca knew that his story wasn't over. It would continue to unfold, not in the grand gestures of fame and fortune, but in the quiet moments of creation, in the smiles of the young craftsmen he mentored, and in the legacy he had left behind for those who would follow in his footsteps. And so, as Luca gazed at the horizon, he knew that the end of one chapter marked the beginning of another. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in his life, he was content. He had learned that success was not defined by what you achieved, but by how you lived, loved, and gave back to the world.